What's up, guys? This is Jay from Revolution Radio. So, Donald Trump Jr. was doing press for his book Triggered. During the Q&A portion of the appearance, a protest broke out. And the protest came from a group called America First. And they are led by a paleo conservative by the name of Nick Fuentes. I kind of looked into this group because I didn't know too much about them. I thought maybe they have a better grasp of politics, um, kind of like how I feel like the progressives do over the neoliberals. So I looked into them and I found out that their issue with Donald Trump and Donald Trump Jr. is that they're too far to the left. The American First group think that they should be to the far right. So that got me looking into this group, which I kind of wish I hadn't, in multiple reasons. Number one, they are just ideologically arrested at a time that doesn't exist. And Nick Fuentes makes some of the most annoying videos I have heard. A lot of just yelling, and I mean, it literally is like watching somebody who's. You ever watch those videos with the children when they open up Christmas presents and they're like yelling, and it's really goddamn annoying. That's pretty much his videos, except for with racism. Anyway, so I looked into the paleo conservative view. And I should also say America First is majority paleo conservative, and there are some libertarians. So here's the finer points of their beliefs and what will fix this country. Number one, religion. Religion needs to come back in a very strong form, they believe. Tradition and law and order are very important. We need to stop being interventionist in our wars, which I agree with. Imperial actions are always the worst. Um, the other issue that they had was our demographics in our country. If you don't know what that means race. They think that the race is a problem, namely immigration. The blacks, the Mexicans, all vote one way, the whites vote this way, so we should kick out the blacks and the Mexicans for voting that way. Oh, I forgot the Jews and the Asians as well. We can't have any of those. It should be all white because they will vote different. Um, I'm not kidding. Those are the main points that they hold to. And that's what they think is going to change the country and make it better. Nick Fuentes was doing an interview with a libertarian by the name of Dave Smith, where God, that's 30 minutes of just pure hate spew. I swear to God, it's just spewing out of both of them. And I had higher hopes for Dave Smith. He's a comic, so I thought, this guy will at least be kind of funny. And he's not even funny. Um, but basically, in this interview, Nick Fuentes goes on to say that he would prefer tyranny and fascism over the blending of white culture and white people. Didn't dog whistle that, didn't hide that in any way. He's saying he prefers a totalitarian government, and he even referenced like China over blending of white culture. How is that popular? How is that something anyone is a fan of? But he has a lot of fans. He has a pretty big following. And what point did conservatives and the right wing lose who they are if this is a representation of them? I mean, there's no hiding what he said out openly. It stands completely behind it. In fact, he reassures that message by saying that when he first came to this ideology, it was because he was at an event and there was a bunch of Antifa there. And he thought that they should all be wrangled up and thrown into prison because they were protesting. remember how I talked about what they believed in? Did you notice how I didn't say constitutionalists? They don't believe in the First Amendment, obviously. It goes against what they want, which is white, totalitarianism, and religion. What a shitty existence that would be. I mean, if that's your perfect world is garbage. I mean, that's. And the thing that boggles my mind is when people say, oh, they're a bunch of Nazis. No, they're not. No, we're not. Yeah, that's fucking Nazism, dude. But I want to give a couple things to push back on. Number one, they blame the falling of our country on the falling of religion, and they blame that on big government and namely big government, honestly, but and the culture. They say our culture now it's just depleted of morals. Um, In fact, in the interview, there was reference to how old TV commercials used to be real wholesome and good, and now all the commercials are about women shaking their asses. Now, one question I'd ask for them is what TV do they watch? Because all I ever see is commercials about pharmaceuticals. I've yet to see a good ass shaking commercial. Um, but no, the loss of religion is science. You don't have to pray for rain anymore. You just look at an app. It's not even the app. We understand how the moon cycle works, how that controls tide, how that controls atmosphere, and ultimately controls rain. It's not about praying to some white guy in the sky, which, by the way, Jesus wasn't white. Um, and that takes me to demographics. What point was America white? Now, here's why I have to bring this up. Because they also referenced Richard Lynn. If you don't know who Richard Lynn is, it's because you're not a fascist racist who believes in what his study found. So Richard Lynn is a psychologist, and he did a study on IQ. His study found that white people had a fairly high IQ on average, and black people had a fairly low IQ on average. Asians having the highest, Mexicans somewhere in between blacks and whites, and so on and so forth. Well, this study has been referenced so many times. In fact, Nick Fuentes, like I said, referenced this study and said that that's part of the issue. When demographics of this country change, when this country becomes more non-white, it will slip into uh, barbarianism because of the low IQ. Now, I question who's low IQ here because when you take a study for what it is and you don't do any sort of research on that study, it seems to me like you would have a low IQ because the Richard Lynn study was done one time, and when it was under review, which means it was replicated, it could not be replicated. Many of his colleagues suggested that the data he was using was shifted in a manner that made African Americans look bad. Um, in fact, there was two noteworthy exceptions of this when his colleagues pointed out these IQs that you're actually putting into the system doesn't match the population's IQ of black people. And to that, he had no answer. It was, without a doubt, the nice way of them saying, you're bullshit and this is a racist study. And that's the truth. That study is complete bunk. It doesn't exist. In fact, there's very little to do with our genetics and our IQ. As far as race is considered. So that's his whole ideology is right there in that one study, and it's destroyed. But he built an empire, although be it a very tiki torch filled empire, which is held up by a house of cards. all on that one study, essentially. That's his whole reason why he said that he would prefer totalitarianism. He would prefer basically Nazism and all control by a government to keep his white culture. Because if it blended and if white was a minority, well, we would descend into chaos because those uneducated black people and Mexicans would ruin our country. Essentially. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, of course, but you don't really have to read between the lines. If you want to look up this interview, it's like I said, Libertarian Dave Smith versus Nick Fuentes, paleo conservative. You can hear it all for yourself. It's completely ridiculous. But I want to go back real quick, as I was saying. Um, America, for the most part, has always been, and look, we have to omit the last few hundred years, but has been Mexican owned and Native American owned. Everything west of like around Kansas was owned by Mexico. In fact, the true barbaric times of America has been the last couple hundred years. See, these guys don't actually do any sort of history. When you look at the founding of America, from that point to now, this land that we live on has only had about 3 to 17 years of peace. That entire time, 3 to 17 years. Why? Well, look into how we got this country. The land grabs were goddamn brutal. Just the land grabs. Not to mention all of the conflicts. In fact, Beau of the Fifth Column did a 3-part series about every conflict we've had in America. You should check it out. It is amazing how many conflicts we've had. Again, enough to add up that we've only had about 3 to 17 years of peace in this country. So, explain to me, paleo conservatives, how once whites take over, it's not barbaric. If your example is the last couple hundred years, where all we've seen is barbarism. And finally, the other answer that they have is law and order. I don't have a problem with law and order, but I do find it weird that the libertarian side digs in on this. Because I thought they were really against overreach by the government. And that's exactly what this is. Law and order, at its base, is great. But when you put too much power on it, it's going to bite you in the ass. I suggest you guys check all of this out. Nick Fuentes is yeah, he's a real scumbag. I wish I could say that in a nice manner, but it's just who he is. And definitely check out this interview, quote unquote interview debate that I am referencing. It is disgusting how wrong both of these individuals are. You can tell that both of them are purely spoiled, privileged children who only read about philosophers and never get into logic, the common sense, or history for that matter. When you have these type of people who've done nothing for this community that is our country, telling us how to live our lives, and that we should pretty much give in to totalitarianism because they're right. Or when you have somebody like Beau of the Fifth Column, who has served in our military, who helps his own community, wants us to all build communities, and he's telling us to listen to common sense and logic and preaches a completely different ideology. It's just easy to figure out who to go with and whose thoughts should hold more weight than another one's. Anyway, that's it for me. I just got triggered, honestly, by my findings of the paleo conservatives and Nick Fuentes and America First, and I just felt like I had to get this out. Probably more for me than for you. But thanks a lot, guys. I appreciate you. Have a good rest of your weekend.